everybody in serial killer country. My name is Brittany Ransom, and this is When Killers Get Caught, a podcast devoted to deep dives into the killers we love to learn about. In season 3, we're going to be talking one-on-one with people who've experienced crime or been deeply affected by the justice system in the United States. But don't fret, you'll still get your deep dives into who killers were, how they grew up, how they killed, and how they got caught. But today we're talking to Kelli Martin, who is writing her first book about the cases in Granbury, Texas that have followed her through her childhood, her career in law enforcement over the last 28 years. Her book is set to come out in the fall of 2023. It is going to be called Homicide in the Hood, as it contains cases from Hood County, Texas. Thanks so much for coming to the podcast, Kelli.
Thank you for having me, Brittany.
Now, as I mentioned, you told me that you have a pretty extensive career working in law enforcement. Specifically, we talked before about you worked as a probation officer for a long time.
Yes, that's correct. I started my career in 1995. About 2 weeks after I graduated from college, I had my first real job, and I was very nervous, scared. I had applied for a job in the newspaper. Yes, this was before the internet, so we had to look up jobs in the newspaper, and there was an ad in there for an adult probation officer. I really didn't think I would get hired, but I gave it a shot anyway. My bachelor's degree is in psychology, so I wanted to try it out because I was always interested in crime. So I started out in actually Hood County in my hometown, which was kind of strange. Seeing people come into the probation office that I had sold beer to at the grocery store when I was a teenager. Yeah, DWI much.
Oops.
So anyway, here I am 28 years later. I changed jobs. I got a little bit of experience here in my hometown and then went to a neighboring county where they had a tuition reimbursement program. So I was working on my master's degree too, as well as working full time.
Wow.
Yeah. And during my time as an adult probation officer, I supervised all kinds of, criminals or offenders per se. People that, from misdemeanors all the way up to very dangerous felons, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, child sexual molestation, aggravated sexual assault. And later on in my career, when I was working in Tarrant County, which is nearby in Fort Worth, Texas, the Fort Worth, Dallas Metroplex area, I supervised sex offenders, and that was pretty interesting. I did that for a while, but all throughout my career in smaller counties, I had sex offenders on my caseload. We didn't have very many specialized caseloads back then, but we also had to go do home visits. We'd have to drive out to these people's houses at late night.
Somebody who's a convicted sex offender on probation, and you're going out to his house?
Yep.
Alone?
Yes. And
oh my goodness.
Well,
and you're not a cop before this. Like some people who get into being probation officers or former military, retired police officers. You're just fresh-faced 20-something blonde girl.
Well, I wasn't blonde back then. I'll just
that
little secret. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I only know what you look like on Instagram.
No, that's okay. Yeah, when you get older, you try and kind of cover that up with blonde, if it starts really turning gray, but that's another story.
They send you off to do home visits. I don't even know if we do that anymore. Is that something we do in the 2020s?
Yes.
We still do home visits. Wow.
Yes, we have to assess a client's, environment, especially if they're a child sex offender. There are certain stipulations. They cannot live near a child safety zone, which could include a school or a daycare or this, that, a park, so on.
Through some of my work that I don't often talk about online, but my real life job, we've come across situations where people can't have computers.
That's correct.
And that's a thing that somebody who went to my church got put back in prison for because he was accessing Facebook.
Oh.
And that was one of the rules of his probation, that while he was on probation, he was not allowed to have social media.
That's correct.
So I get it.
sex offenders have quite a few conditions of probation compared to the standard case, such as DWI or theft or something of that nature. They have pages of restrictions, including polygraph examinations, at least here in Texas. Now, in other states, I can't speak to that. I'm sure that in some situations they do utilize a polygraph to monitor their ongoing behavior uh, while under supervision. In many cases, they may be allowed to have contact with minors, but only in the presence of a chaperone. And I know here in Texas, the probation department conducts, you know, investigation into the person that's applying to be a chaperone, and
Oh,
they have
makes
to
sense.
yes, they have to attend classes to learn about the conditions of supervision. The offender has to sit right there in front of his loved one who he wants to be a chaperone and tell them exactly what he or she did.
Wow.
So we're looking at the offense report as we're conducting the chaperone vetting process, and he has to sit right in front of them. He cannot deny it, or she cannot deny it, because one of the conditions we have here in Texas is you admit to your offense or you go to jail, because you're not going to waste 10 years on probation denying that you committed the offense and deny yourself the opportunity to have sex offender treatment and improve and learn to control these behaviors.
That's so interesting. It's one of the things that well, on one hand, you want to know more about it, but on the other hand, you're like, maybe I don't want to know anything about this process. But it's I mean, one of the things that since I currently work with children, it's child sexual assault training is part of our job now.
Right.
And it's in my state after what happened with Jerry Sandusky. I don't know if you remember
Yes.
that.
Oh, yes.
Right. So I live in Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
After the situation with Jerry Sandusky happened, they completely overhauled everything. And now, if you work with a child in any capacity at all, even volunteering, you have to go through the same trainings I go through. You have to have all the same background checks, the National Sex Offender Registry, the NSOR, which,
Right.
side note, we didn't have until 2019, which wildly, we should have had a national registry much earlier than we do now. But that's beside the point. We have our national registry now. And that's to check because I'm sure, as you know, people hop states to try and get away from this charge. Uh,
Right.
and I mean, I think right now, the rate for child sexual assault is like 1 in 4, which is the lowest it's been since we started looking at the numbers roughly 70 years ago. So it's not great, but
No,
it's better
25% of children being molested
before
is not good.
18. Yep.
Right. Yeah, that is a
It's
true and accurate statistic.
yeah.
But anyway, I went and did a lot of other things too. I've taught at universities. I taught at Texas Christian University for 2 years full time, and then most of that time as an adjunct professor, and then the local community college. So I've always had one foot in academia and one
Hmm.
foot in the practitioner side, which I think provides me a unique opportunity and set of knowledge and information. And so the last 10 to 13 years, I've worked as a researcher for adult probation departments. But before, I was a court officer. I mean, I've done everything you can do in probation. I've written pre-sentence investigation reports for the judges, conducted
And you
field
did
work.
some work in creating guidelines and things, didn't you?
um,
Or I think it was like,
like for policies.
yes.
Yes, that's part of my current job as a research and policy planner. But I think maybe you might be referring to back in 2005 or 2006, when a lot of the sex offender residency restrictions were coming out, and sort of, from some of the different pieces of federal legislation that had been passed, the Jacob Wetterling Act, the Megan's Law, and things of that nature really kind of got going. It took a while for some counties to catch on, but I help the city of Arlington, Texas, where we have the Texas Rangers baseball team and the Dallas Cowboys. Don't boo people, I know.
I'm
uh,
saying nothing as a resident
right?
Eagles fan. I'm saying
No, I
nothing.
know. But I helped the city of Arlington provide them some research to help them draft their sex offender residency restriction ordinance, city ordinance. So
That's incredible.
it was
I
very
mean,
interesting.
you're
I was
a
honored to
part of
do that.
something that's going to go on much further than you. I mean, kind of like a
Right?
book, but I mean, this has a, I mean, books are recreation, you know what I mean? But like, this
Right?
is also like something that's going to affect potentially people's safety for decades to come. I think that's amazing
I never really thought about that. But yes,
because I
that's
mean,
true.
those lists are things that the schools that I work at keep an eye on,
Right.
where people are living, where these people frequent,
Mhm.
so we know who gets released just in case we see them walking through the area.
Right. And, I would like to say just one thing about that. I don't want people to misunderstand. I think the media has kind of given us some type of false perception about kids being snatched in the park, all the time. And I'm not saying that
Oh.
doesn't happen, but
No,
it's
that was
80%.
definitely how I was raised in the
Yeah.
90s.
80% of
Stranger danger,
victims,
but
right.
that's
We
not
all
true.
know, right. 80% of 8 or higher of victims know their perpetrator in some fashion, whether it's a family member, a neighbor, and so on. You know that. So,
Mhm.
mhm,
It's actually one of the things that's the most terrifying about it. Now, we've
that is true.
got your work history, which shows that you are obviously very distinguished. I mean, you got multiple degrees, you've worked in this field. You told me in our pre interview that your family also worked in law enforcement. And so, what brings you to the place now? It's 2023 where you're like, I need to write a book.
Well, my daughter has moved out of the house and gone to college. That's one of
Oh,
the, and that's my only child. So I'm like, what am I supposed to do with my life now? I'm working. I'm still working full time, and I'm not retiring anytime soon. I've always wanted to write a book, you know, and this year is the 35th anniversary of the murder of a young lady here in my hometown, Holly Palmer.
hmm.
And it really affected a lot of people. And there's been a lot of murders in this town that affected me, especially growing up from like say 1980 forward, especially the 1988 when Holly was murdered. And those
Let's
murders had
talk
a
a little.
tremendous impact on me. So you know, I need
Yeah,
to. I
no.
just want to write a book to honor the victims and their families.
So I guess let's talk about Holly Palmer then. I mean, like you said, this was something that affected you pretty greatly. When Holly died, how old would you have been?
I was a junior in high school.
And she was only a couple years older than you
Right.
at
She was
23.
23. Right. Hmm.
Well, let's tell the listeners what actually happened to Holly.
Okay. Okay. So on November 27th, in the wee hours of the morning, around 1:30, 2 a.m., somewhere around there, Holly was working at the Greyhound Trailways bus station. She had actually just purchased that franchise. So she was very excited and she was spending a lot of her free time up at the bus station late at night working. She also was planning on opening a t shirt shop inside of the bus station. And it's a small bus station, it's inside of a house. It doesn't look like a normal bus station you would see in a large city.
Ah,
It's in a little wood frame house on the main Pearl Street that runs through town. And it's about two doors down from our drive-in movie theater. We have one of
okay.
the oldest operating drive-in. It's been continually in operation since 1952.
Oh,
But
that's
anyway,
awesome.
little factoid there, historical factoid. But so she was up there working, and this was close to Thanksgiving, and her sister had talked to her that day and said everybody's excited, or maybe it was the day after, but no, it wasn't. I was getting the timeline mixed up just a tad, but her sister had talked to her. Maybe it was earlier that morning before the murder happened. Yes, that's right. And so she said, "Everybody's so excited. We're waiting on you to get here." we want to play Monopoly. And Holly just kind of giggled. They played board games when they got together as a family.
Mm-hmm.
And she told her sister that she had to go take care of something. And her sister asked her, "Well, are you breaking up with your boyfriend?" And she said, "Yeah, I need to take care of that.
Oh.
He's, um, there were some issues going on there." And so she did that. And later on, I mean, her sister would never see her at Thanksgiving.
Uh,
So at 1:30, 1:40, the police have been investigating this and checking leads, and they did back then. They chased down a lot of leads, talked to witnesses. Over the years, they've gotten more. They've gotten witnesses to come forward with just a little bit more information, but people were afraid of, the primary suspect. But he beat her in the head with a hammer so severely, and then that if that wasn't enough, drug her by her ankles to another
mm,
part of the bus station and bludgeoned her, continued to bludgeon her with a huge concrete cinder block.
Shoosh.
And I mean, as you can imagine, there was blood spatter all over the walls. It was everywhere. I mean, it was horrible. And the police, and this is two doors down from the sheriff's department.
Oh gosh.
It's right next door.
Ballsy.
Yeah, so when people were scared to death, if this can happen right next door to the sheriff's department, nobody's safe. I mean, my gosh.
Right.
But of course, this was back before there were video surveillance and cameras everywhere, and that sort of thing. And the guy just snuck in there in the middle of the night because he knew she was actually going to live there. She was making some living quarters for herself. And
Oh, okay. I was thinking about that. I was like, was this a robbery gone wrong? Or this was
well,
specifically
no,
somebody went after her?
yeah, this was personal. I mean,
Mm.
there might have been $50 missing, but there were other things in there that weren't disturbed, that weren't taken. And so this had to be somebody that knew Holly would be in there that late, you know.
I knew where
So
she was. And now here's the thing, they did interviews and things. And like you said, people were
mhm,
afraid of the person who we're not mentioning because it's alleged.
right,
So,
right.
but
So the
do
police,
they think he knew her?
yeah, they know he knew her.
How?
They've
Just based
always
on the
known.
job, or did he have some other connection?
Well, they interviewed witnesses and got
Mm-hmm.
some statements and confirmed some things that were
Uh,
some of their theories and suspicions. But like I said, this there were reports that this was the most brutal thing that the police had ever seen in our little Granbury, Texas. That one of the police officers just vomited outside.
oh,
It was terrible.
well,
And they
yeah,
made one of the rookie cops spend the night in the bus station just in case the killer returned to the crime scene.
because that
That,
happens
yeah,
sometimes.
it sure does. So, what an eerie thing for this guy, you know,
Right? Yeah, that's got to be a creepy aspect of your job,
right? So,
staying at a crime scene overnight.
and that,
Ugh.
he was a rookie that stayed with him forever, and he's 62 years old now. He
And
will
you
never
interviewed
forget that.
you've been interviewing everybody.
I've been talking to lots of people around town. If they'll talk to me, they get all, paranoid. But I'm like, it's Kelly, okay? You've known me my whole life. You knew my dad. You knew my mama. You went to church with some of my family members. Uh, so I'm just trying, and I think the hesitation is with being, I guess, labeled as a journalist. But I'm like, it's just Kelly, okay? We're talking. I'm not going to put anything in the book that you do not want in there, but I'm just trying to get a clearer picture of what's going on. But the interesting thing is, I've been contacted by the granddaughter of another victim in the book. She found out through Facebook that I was writing this book, and she sent me a message and asked if her grandmother would be covered. She said, I'm her granddaughter. And I was just taken aback, and she seemed happy that her grandmother's story would be in there. So that was great. And I've since talked to her. She's sending me some photos of her grandmother, and she's given me some stories, about
Oh,
she was 12 years old when she found out her grandmother had been murdered. And her parents were out on a little trip out of town for their anniversary, and
what a
nobody would
horrible thing to come back
know.
to.
No, right? It was awful. I cannot imagine what they were going through. But yeah, it's been very interesting. I've also been able to hang out with the cold case squad in a neighboring jurisdiction. That was interesting. I got to ask questions, and there were a couple of retired former Texas Ranger law enforcement agents, a retired game warden, two retired IRS investigators.
Mm-hmm.
So, they bring different perspectives, but there was literally over 350 years worth of law enforcement experience in that room. So, they were
So
very
that's interesting. I didn't think about that before. So the cold case unit is comprised of a lot of people who are retired.
in our area because a lot of smaller counties do not have the funding, and we just don't have, this isn't Dallas, Houston, New York City,
Gotcha.
Chicago. We don't really have the need for a full-time cold case squad 24/7, Uh,
Right. Okay.
and plus we don't have the funding, people, the officers are working active cases. So, we've gotten retired guys that have years and years of experience, and they, work with younger guys, younger law enforcement officers to have a fresh set of eyes to look at things too. And maybe some of them are up on technology a little bit more as well. But yeah, it's very interesting that they're just still continuing. They can't let it go.
I was
They're
thinking that
retired, they're
too.
75 or whatever, and they're still working. They won't, I mean, they won't let it go. They have to keep doing it for the
I've come
victim.
across that in a lot of my research too, that it's not just you, a lot of people who they get close to these cases. Actually, right before we were talking about of course I forget her name, but the woman who was a part of the team that helped with the Golden State Killer cases.
Yes.
I was a part of that documentary recently, and her, I mean, she was following that case for decades.
Right.
She never let that go. So
Couldn't.
after talking to dozens of victims and collecting all that evidence, that's got to eat at you somehow.
Yeah, it really does. It's because if we don't think about this, but officers and law enforcement and first responders and people of that nature, they suffer PTSD. They suffer from secondary trauma from dealing with these types of, even if they'll even though they may not admit it or recognize it initially. I think more so nowadays we understand about post traumatic stress, but it
Well, we
affects them
definitely
too.
didn't 30, 40 years ago. We weren't
Right,
even as
right.
well versed as we are
Yeah,
now.
right. So, yeah, it affects them. They carry it with them. They wake up talking about it, thinking about it, going to sleep thinking about it, and they have to keep that separated from their family. You can't go home and tell your wife every horrible thing that you saw all day out at work, or have your children over here, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, like some of the officers that I've talked to, I ask them about a case. Yep, remember that one. They just,
Wow.
it's etched in their mind.
So we definitely have Dolly's case. And how many total
Holly
cases?
Palmer.
Yeah,
Her
Holly.
sister's
What I
name
call
is
her
Dolly. I
Dolly.
know.
Dolly is her sister.
I
Holly is the
did. Yeah.
victim.
Right.
So we have Holly's case, but how many total cases are you researching for the book?
Well, I'm researching really 6 cases. There's a chapter for each of these 6 cases, and they're not through my research. At first I was thinking, okay, these are all unsolved cases. But then, lo and behold, not too long ago, when I thought I was done writing a particular chapter, I kept digging and digging, and well, it's been solved. It was solved in 2010.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
a 1987 case. All these years later, and they never ever would have known about it unless the guy confessed. He got caught for doing something else and was in jail,
Oh, and
and
thought he could
on
leverage.
he well, that didn't work. You got 2 life sentences.
They sometimes think because it's happened in the past, but I think you just have to have an incredible lawyer because people sometimes, I mean, Bundy
This
tried
guy
that.
didn't have a lawyer. He just told the people. He just told the Texas Ranger
Hmm.
that he murdered somebody. And you know what he said? People were like, "Why did this guy confess? He never would have gotten caught for this murder." It's because of the rapport that the officer built with him, the way
Mm.
he, and I talked to that officer, I talked to that Texas Ranger, and he said, "I just treat people the way I would want to be treated. I was raised a certain way. You treat people with empathy, with kindness, even though it's a killer. You have to try and show this." And he was talking to him, about spirituality and so forth. And the guy just felt guilty. He couldn't keep
Oh, he had
lying.
a guilty conscience.
Yes, he did. But he had tried
Ah.
to kidnap a lady in the Walmart parking lot here in Granbury,
Oh,
and
Jesus.
yeah, and but see, he had already sexually assaulted. He had been out of prison 3 months, and 3 months later, the guy's already trying to kidnap somebody and rape him. He was in prison he got a 20-year sentence for rape. So 3 months when he got out of prison, he tried to kidnap somebody else. So he was out on bail for kidnapping in our county. Then he skipped bail, and while
Oh.
he was not under the, watchful eyes of the authority, he murdered somebody in another county up by the Texas-Arkansas border. Then
I wish I could say that's not common, but
I
I've come
know,
across a
right?
bunch of cases where somebody's out on parole or
Mhm.
waiting for a trial and boom,
Yeah,
they do something
they
else
can't
even
stop
worse.
themselves. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so we didn't even know that he had murdered the lady in the other county. We just got him for bail jumping, right? So they go in
Mhm.
to talk to him. He confesses to 2 murders. The
Oh,
cold case murder in Hood County from 1987, and then the murder that he had just committed in Cass County, Texas, which is close to the Texas-Arkansas border. Yeah.
now I want your, I guess, opinion on this because right now I'm actually researching Otis Toole and the
Henry Lee Lucas.
ridiculousness that went on
Mhm.
with that case, with of course, they admitted to hundreds of murders, which we later
Mhm.
on learned they couldn't have possibly committed all of those.
Right.
But, with Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, I mean, how do you feel about that when you have someone who shows up and just says, "Hey, I did this"? I mean, are we believing these people? What's the process of trying to figure out if they're just attention grabbing,
Right.
feel
Well,
genuine remorse,
mhm, mhm.
or trying to get attention? Like, how do we avoid Henry Lee Lucas and Otis now?
Well, this guy gave details that only the killer would
Mm,
know.
gotcha.
Only the killer would know. Yeah, he took this lady, he kidnapped her from a convenience store, gas station, took her to and robbed he only got $57, but this was in 1987, and he took her to a abandoned mobile home in a little
Okay.
subdivision here, raped her, and then took her to the boat ramp and drowned her.
Wow.
Yeah. And you don't see as many, homicides by drowning.
I was just thinking that I was like, usually people they want to feel it.
He did.
They want to,
Hold her head under the
I,
water. Yeah.
as horrible as that is to say, they
Yeah.
want to feel the life drain out of the person. Is this like a drowning by homicide, more of like a just getting rid of her because you
Yeah.
can't let the victim live after you did all that?
Right. That's
Oh,
exactly what it was. He stuck her head under the water and held her down there until she was deceased. And it just so happens there was a fishing tournament that morning on our lake, and he had just left her there floating in the water. And a fisherman who had launched his boat from that boat ramp about 5 a.m., 5:20 that morning. He didn't see anything then, but when he gets back around 7, she's there. So, yeah, he called authorities, and of course, they They came and investigated, but it went cold. I mean, they had several suspects in the beginning, and they polygraphed quite a few people. They, interviewed people from different counties. They had one at one point, the sheriff, who at that time was my cousin, Edwin Tomlinson, he was elected in 1980. He thought maybe this person, a mental patient that had just been recently released from a psychiatric facility in a neighboring county, had been in the store that morning. And so they chased that lead down. But, everything just kind of went cold because they didn't have the right person. And they never would have caught this guy unless he had just spontaneously confessed.
So you said before that all of these cases really meant something to you.
Yes, they really had a tremendous impact on me. In 1980, I was in fourth grade, so I was probably about 9 or 10 years old. And that was the first time I really learned what murder was. Because
Mm.
Granbury was such a small town back then. We only had 2,500 people within the city limits and six, maybe 6,000 people in the entire county, which is 437 square miles. So everybody knew everyone, and when something like this happened, it was very traumatic and scary. So my mom started locking our doors and, was just scared to death of something happening to us. And and then a murder occurred 3 weeks later.
Oh, wow.
A young 21-year-old girl was stabbed. She had only worked at this laundromat for 3 days and was stabbed. And I don't want to give away too much because the book has that chapter and the chapter before, there is a link to some serial killers. So
Oh.
we'll leave that as a kind of
A teaser for the future for
right.
people who want to buy it
And
to learn
nobody will
about what serial killer is linked to Granbury.
right. Granbury, nobody knows where that is.
To be fair, you're right. I couldn't point it out. But I think most people couldn't point out small towns in any state.
Right. There's small towns all over the country, and I'm sure most of your listeners have had some kind of experience with that or known somebody or, heard of in a neighboring small town. It affects everyone all over.
Well, it's so weird because I'm not sure about this because you're a bit older, you're a little older than I am, but I feel like throughout all of my childhood, just nonstop crime, bad things happening in the news, like every day, just inundated with it. So it becomes like part of the background noise,
Hmm.
especially because I grew up in a town like 30 minutes outside of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And if you don't know this, for a brief bit during the 80s, they called Philadelphia Killadelphia. So things were a little
Yeah. A little rough.
intense in the city back then. So I don't know if it affected me like it would have affected you cuz these are people you saw. I mean,
Yes. I went into that gas station where a lady was kidnapped and drowned.
mhm.
I My dentist office and my daycare was on the same street as this laundromat where this girl was stabbed. There was a lady that was stabbed 110 times in her home.
Sheesh.
And my best friend growing up, her house was right around the corner in that same neighborhood. And,
Wow.
and the bus station, 2 doors down from the sheriff's department. But guess what? 2 doors on the opposite side was my grandmother's house.
And
And
you had family who worked in that very same.
yeah, my cousin was the sheriff when this happened. Now, this happened actually inside the city limits, so it was under the jurisdiction of the police department. But in Little Granbury, every cop in the county, it didn't matter if they were sheriff's department or city cops, they showed up at Holly's crime scene. It was
Wow.
it was horrible. And get this, Holly's stepsister was a police dispatcher, and she's the one that had to dispatch the call.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah.
Because she
And
had to have known who it was when they listed the location.
yes, exactly, because nobody else would be there at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And so Holly's stepsister's husband was actually a sheriff's deputy at the time, so he actually came to the scene as well. So yeah,
So now because we're talking about these are cases from 20, 30 years ago.
Right.
What's it like interviewing the people who lost family members and things now?
It's very, gosh, I'm trying to think of the right word. Well, I personally know, Dolly Palmer, which is one of Holly's sisters, and another sister was just a grade or two above me in school, so I knew of her. But I was kind of wary about, would the family members be upset? Maybe they didn't want to have the scab ripped off, of this wound, so to speak. But Holly's sister there and her family are very appreciative because Holly's case is still unsolved and or not prosecuted when there's been somebody that the police has suspected all along. But you never know. You never know how family members are going to react. So
Mm.
far, it's been. I try to be very careful about how I ask questions. Especially of one of the lady that reached out to me via Facebook Messenger. I don't know her that well, but
Mhm.
she was very appreciative that her grandmother's story would be included in the book. And so I think people realize that I'm doing this because I don't want these women to be forgotten. No, and I want to honor the victims and their families, and I want to educate people about what families go through. Really hear from them. So in
Mhm.
one of my chapters, I have had these family members write up a little story about when they first got the call, how they
Oh.
reacted, what they were thinking, what they were feeling. And because I've been friends with um, Dolly for about 4 years now, we've had long, deep conversations about it. And it, you know, try not to cry here.
Oh.
She is a true inspiration to me because she is like a bulldog, a pit bull. She's going to dig in and not let go. She will not stop fighting for her sister to get justice for Holly, no matter how painful it is. She
Mhm.
has pushed through the tears. She has pushed through the anxiety that, this is causing me. But she said, keep doing it. We're going to keep going. I'm faithful. I'm hopeful that God is in control here, that this is really when something is going to happen with my sister's case. She has pushed through all of that pain to do this for her sister, to speak to me almost daily about the book and the people I'm talking to and the progress we're trying to make and reinvigorating interest in our community about these cases that have not been solved.
It's so tough. There's a big lens on the true crime community right now, especially as it relates to at home sleuths, as they refer to people who want to help cases. And it's an interesting thing because, in some regard, those at home sleuths end up being responsible for reopening cases, opening things like that. But of course,
Correct.
bad things happen too.
Mhm.
Um, it's tough. I don't know. I mean, just doing what I do, which is recounting cases that have been solved, it's very emotional.
I started writing this book at the end of March, maybe 1st of April, and I've almost written this entire book. I have not been sleeping. I have not been eating. I haven't been exercising. I haven't been taking care of myself. As a matter of fact, I stayed up till 5 o'clock this morning. I mean, I was up for well over 24 hours and got a few hours sleep before I was to do the podcast this morning. I couldn't stop. And so,
No, I totally understand what you're saying. I used
yeah,
to work my 8-hour job, come home, and just research and write until like 1 or 2 in the morning. Actually, that's why the podcast hasn't come out so regularly recently, because I'm trying to find a healthy workflow. And it's very difficult because, like, sometimes you read something or about someone that something happened to, and you feel compelled to get it out of you, and in a
yes,
way,
that's what's happening.
and you just have to.
Yeah. And I'm, but I'm not. I don't know. I just keep thinking I need to do this because I need people in my community and everywhere. I mean, this book, that Homicide in the Hood, Murders that Haunt a Small Town Girl, I mean, anybody can relate. There's, anybody that lives in a small town across the globe, not just here in the United States, they can relate to murders like that affecting a small community. And just by me starting to write this book, it is kind of stirring things up around here, and things are happening, which is great. I mean, it's exactly what I intended to do in addition to honoring the victims and their families. So, being a researcher too, and being a professor and teaching, some of the book is, the book is written from a first person point of view, from my perspective growing up as a kid. And I had kind of an interesting childhood. So there are funny stories or weird things. My connections to being a victim, are woven throughout the book. But also being an educator, I want this to be an educational experience because I've worked in the criminal justice system for nearly 30 years, and the TV programs and all of the, Law and Order, SVU, and all these different kinds of programs, CSI and everything, people get an erroneous perception of how the criminal justice system actually operates and how it actually works. All the
Oh,
cop
yeah.
shows and all of that. And so I want to kind of have a little educational piece in my book too about the different types of forensic techniques and technologies, how they work. And interestingly enough, the former Granbury chief of police from years ago reached out to me because he, saw me posting online and social media about the upcoming book. And he said, Kelly, do you remember this case? Well, little old Granbury, Texas Police Department made Texas history, at least. We were the first police department to connect a suspect using CODIS when CODIS was fully online and operational in 1998.
Oh, awesome.
Yes, so we
For
were
people who don't know, CODIS is.
the combined DNA indexing system, which is operated by the FBI. So people submit, when there's a sample found of some kind of biological material at a crime scene, they collect that, submit it to the system, and compare it to other samples. And those other samples can come from other crime scenes. They can be in there because a state law requires an arrestee, a felony arrestee, to submit a sample, or
I
a
think
convict.
in California, they require that now.
Yes. All 50 states have some type of legislation requiring DNA submission from certain types of felons. In Texas, it's all felons,
Okay.
every single felon. And anybody that's placed on supervision that was convicted of a felony, they submit a sample to. And of course, all sex offenders.
I mean, and
So,
that was invaluable up in, I think it was Michigan, where there was I don't want to be wrong, she was either a police officer or somehow related to the Justice Department. And she realized there were like 4,000 rape kits that had never been properly
mhm.
tested or submitted. And when they finally, I think she raised the money for it, it took years, but they were able to link so many felons that were already in the system
Yes.
to
Yeah.
these crimes.
Well, the federal government has, they provide grants through the Office of Justice Programs and the Bureau of Justice Assistance. So there are actually federal grants available right now to law enforcement agencies to test the backlog of rape kits and sexual assault kits. So,
That's so
and
good to know because when that
yes,
first came out like 10 years ago, it was pretty alarming
right, right.
that we had thousands upon thousands of rape kits and
Mhm.
all these
And
potential
there's,
rapists just out there.
right, running around doing what they do, unfortunately. And there's still a backlog. I mean, even with the federal funding, it's just, but it's really interesting that the cops, that law enforcement, even back before they even knew anything, like they could never have imagined that we'd be using genetic genealogy right now to solve cases, but
Right?
they collected biological materials. Somehow they knew, okay, this is evidence, this is important, and if it was preserved properly, and not mishandled over the years, my gosh, look at all the cases it's solving now 20, 30, 40 years later.
I mean, that's the one I referenced earlier, Joseph
Right.
James D'Angelo.
Right. Golden State Killer.
30 years later, we
Mm,
get a match based on
yes.
somebody in the family doing a DNA test.
Right. Isn't
Incredible.
isn't that amazing? I just
And this
can't
is
believe
happening
it.
all over the place. I get
Right.
alerts on my phone because I set up Google Alerts for cases. This cold case handled based on genealogy. I mean,
Right.
it's awesome.
Mhm.
Uh, but also it just
It's
all
kinda
these people who
scary.
got away with stuff because
Right.
we just didn't have the tools to get them.
Right. And so that's why I wanted to put and there's 10 chapters in the book, Homicide in the Hood. Chapter 9 is about forensic techniques and technologies, and like I said, being a professor and an educator, I'm not going through a complete timeline of forensics because that goes back to, uh, 50, 70 AD, I mean, way, or
Listen,
even BC, I mean, there's,
we were always trying stuff. It
yes,
wasn't always right, but we were trying things. I
yes,
mean, I know for a while they were very set on your blood type. That was a
right.
way to
That was the only
eliminate
thing we
people
had.
very
Mhm.
quickly.
Yes, yes. So nowadays, it's just, there's so many amazing things. The MVAC technology, which has been recently used to solve a 40-year-old cold case. Um, the MVAC is a wet vac system that squirts like a sterile solution onto an object and creates like this mini hurricane, and it loosens up all the biological material. And it's really good for obtaining DNA from very porous, rough surfaces that maybe
Oh,
is not traditionally, like the swabbing technique is kind of, but you can use this for a large surface to make sure you get every little piece
everything.
of, yes, and it puts that into a special filter, and then you can take it out and test it and that sort of thing. But you can test rocks and bricks and different kinds of surface. And you know what? This technology was first designed to be used in the food industry to remove pathogens from, work surfaces, and, hey, let's get all the germs out of
Oh,
this place where we're cooking food, y'all.
right. No, it makes total sense.
Right? So, yeah, that's been around for a while, but they've solved a 40-year-old cold case by using that technology on a really, really old piece of evidence.
Oh, that's cool.
So I'm learning a lot. I am learning quite a bit, and I love that. Uh, Writing this book and doing all of the research and getting on Ancestry, and digging around and trying to find people and looking at people's criminal histories, and writing the chapter about technology. And then it's been a very interesting learning experience, but it also has kind of been a step back in time, going through all of the
Mm.
old newspaper archives. I grew up in this town. I remembered when these things happened, and these murders affected me. They really did. And
Right. These are your ghosts too.
they are. And I don't want to take any kind of, empathy or anything away from the victims' families, but they did, it did affect them, obviously, but it affects the community when something like this happens, especially in a small town. It robs people of their safety.
Mhm.
It really changes people's behavior. I mean, we didn't lock our doors. Kids rode our bikes all around. We'd leave the house at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning during the summer, and we wouldn't come back until it's dark. You can't do that nowadays. So
It's so interesting that we brought this up about how this made you feel because my first episode this season was speaking to another author,
oh,
and she wrote a book about she actually wrote a fictional book
okay,
about a crime that didn't it was her who would have been her mother-in-law. But
okay,
she's talked to this man named Howard Morton, and he reminded her that she had a right to care, even though the woman who died wasn't her mom.
Mhm.
even though she divorced out of the family. Like, she still had a right to care about the things that happen, and it's okay that we care.
Right.
On
And that
some in
mhm.
some ways, true crime is entertainment, but it's okay that we care about the people that we write about and talk about. And it's even more so right that you care because you lived there.
Yeah. I there was, another murder that happened that I'm not gonna cover in the book because the family member just asked me not to. They're not ready at this time.
Okay.
But I spent the night at their house. I had a close personal connection to them. I worked at a grocery store with them as teenagers, and you know, I was 20 years old when this girl was murdered, and I mean that was the first time I'd ever actually had a close personal connection to someone that had died in that manner, and it was devastating. And I was in college at that time. I was majoring in English, and
Hey, that's what
yeah,
I went to school for.
and you know,
I switched, but that's what I started out
See, me
studying.
too. I switched. I switched to psychology. I think, just having a lot of family members, myself in law enforcement, and and seeing that they're good people and that they want to help people, and then me having a helping nature as well. And I don't know. I changed my major. I wanted to, study psychology, but I know that these murders have had an impact on me, and I've always wanted to write a book. It's kind of like the last professional or goal that I have in my life to complete. I've published other articles and published in scholarly criminal justice articles. I mean journals. The
Which I
articles
will
you
link listeners to if you want to see Kelly's
have.
other writing. I
You
have
know,
it saved. It's going to go in.
remember having to write papers for school and look up resources and cite your sources? Well, that's the
Hmm.
kind of writing that I've done mostly. I mean, I did do something for the U.S. Department of Justice back in 2008. I was a field researcher examining domestic minor sex trafficking. Oddly enough, with one of my old graduate school professors, Dr. Ray Eve. Um, so that was pretty interesting to team up with one of my former professors to do that research. But but this writing is the most meaningful to me because it's about my community. It's about people that I knew. It's about connections to places that I had been, and it was frightening. I mean, my mother has literally been waiting for the other shoe to drop her entire life. She has been
Oh.
so afraid of somebody breaking in our house, which they did try, and that there's a little recap, a story about that in the book. It's
Hmm.
pretty entertaining because in Texas everybody has guns. That's all I'm going to say. So, so you'll just have to read the book to find out what happened. But um,
I'm interested. Why is your mom afraid if everyone has guns? Aren't they
well,
supposed to make it better?
you know what? Well, my mom has suffered her own trauma in her life, so that's caused
Mm.
some anxiety for her, and so she was always very protective of us and very afraid. And she literally has been waiting for the other shoe to drop, something bad to happen, which
Oh,
is sad. My poor mom. But yeah, we had guns, but sometimes, that's not enough.
well, I mean, the statistics about those are so up and down. I mean,
Hmm.
what's the statement that women are more likely to die by the gun in their home when they have one? That's not a good feeling to have because you
Yeah,
got it to protect yourself. It's
right.
rough.
And that's why in Texas we keep them locked and loaded on our nightstand. There's no sense in digging around in your drawer somewhere trying to load the gun. It's right there.
Gosh, I know we talked about so much fun stuff before, but I think we'll leave your funnier stories for your book for
Okay.
people to
Yeah.
read. No, I mean, because it's a serious. It's serious. It's
Yeah.
as you're talking, I'm thinking about a situation. A little boy I knew who was killed. Um, we semi grew up together. I worked at like his summer camp. His mom knew my parents.
Mm,
Um, what I'm thinking about is how that crime affected his mom to this day.
yeah.
I mean, he would be almost 30 years old now. And I
Right.
think he died when he was like 13. And
Oh, it's
she's written
horrible.
and talked about it extensively. And it was just so senseless.
Yeah, they all are. And I write about the last chapter in the book is about the families and how they deserve justice. And I talk a little bit about what justice is, but I also have had some of the family members of the victims write an excerpt of something for me to use in that chapter. And I also talk a little bit about empathy, and I throw in a little bit of research, scholarly research, because that's what I do. I'm sorry, I can't help it, people. I'm a nerd too. So I throw in research, like real legitimate scientific research about how homicide affects the family members, which, by the way, which you may already know this, Brittany, but for the listeners who do not, they're called co victims of homicide. They are left behind to pick up the pieces of their lives because someone they loved has been taken away from them.
I
So,
didn't know about that, but where I work offers therapy for not just the victims of sexual assault, but
mhm,
also the family members too, for free,
yes,
in our community. And they were the first people I heard that used that terminology. Some of the people who work there have been
right,
connected to our department because we work with kids, and of course, sexual assault is happens to children too. But
right.
that was the first time I heard that phrasing used was this year. Was that the rest of the family technically are considered victims too?
Right. And it's in the scholarly research. It has been. So that's great that you heard that from folks at your employment. That means that they are staying abreast of scientific research for their field, which is important for all any job.
I mean, unfortunately, the predators are up on the information too, so everybody else has got to be.
That's right. We're always, it seems like we're always one step behind them, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny you mentioned that about anybody that knows me, I just have kind of a crazy personality. I always am trying to make people laugh, and I kind of always wanted to be a stand up comedian, and then I have my serious side where I'm doing this research and, publishing articles and all of these things. And I don't, I'm just myself. I'm just a small town girl from Granbury. No matter what I've accomplished in my career, that's still how I see myself. But like you said, it's a serious subject. But in the book, there's kind of some funny stories about me and different things growing up. And the first chapter in Homicide in the Hood sets the stage for the reader to kind of immerse themselves in Little Hood County, Texas. And it's interesting that we call it Homicide in the Hood. That could be any hood. It could be anybody's
Mhm.
neighborhood, any small town in the country. But I just kind of set the stage for the reader, and then I go into this. The bulk of the book is about the cases, and then kind of the last part, kind of section 3 of the book is called Justice and Demand, and
Mm.
it's about some murderers who got caught and really really punished around here. Some very significant cases that affected a lot of people, in a really old cold case from 1979 that was solved in 2014. And that occurred under very interesting circumstances. So I throw in a little bit of that about cases that were solved and some weird stories from, like, the newspapers I found from back in the early '80s. Um, but then go on to talk about how forensic technology has so advanced, and how it can be used to solve certain cases and types of evidence. And then the last chapter to round it all out is about the victims and their families. And I know you are too. I'm a very empathetic person.
Yeah.
Which is different from sympathy. Sympathy is kind of feeling bad for a person. You see what they're going through, but empathy is putting yourself in another person's shoes and trying to imagine what their feelings are. It helps us. It's part of our emotional intelligence to connect with other people and to have relationships. Um, so I want people to feel that, and I want people to get motivated, get active to do something not just in my town, but in your town, wherever that may be, if there are cold cases that haven't been solved, what's going to help is pressure from the community, you
That's
know,
right.
pressure to political elected officials, keeping that information fresh in the minds of the community. And we've all seen stories, and I know you have, Brittany, you've covered lots of cases where the community has just, everybody came out searching for the missing girl, right?
Mhm.
People came out in droves. It just really impacted a community. Everybody was involved. That's sometimes what it's going to take, because right now in our day and age, you know, we need to be connected. COVID
It's
has really,
weird.
yeah,
It's
COVID has
weird
kind
how
of pushed
social
things there.
media has made us
We're
less
disconnected.
connected.
Yeah, it it's a different thing, sitting in front of a murder victim's family member and watching the pain in their face while they talk about their loved one and getting angry. They have every right to be frustrated and angry that their loved one's case has not been solved, and they feel like nobody cares anymore.
Hmm.
They see people going on with their lives. How can they go on? They're thinking, how
Well,
can I go on and live? How can they go on and live their lives when my sister or my mother is still dead and we don't know who did it?
do you remember the Hart family murders? There was a lesbian couple with 6 adopted children. The mothers were implicated in child abuse, and they drove their
Hmm.
car off
I
of a
don't
cliff
think
in
so.
California.
Oh my gosh. No, I don't think I've heard of that one.
It happened in 2018, and actually shortly after I kind of blew up on TikTok, the mother, the biological mother of 3 of the children who had died,
Mm.
and they were taken away from her because she had a mental illness, which is so unfair. And on top of that, she reached out to me and she was just like, "Can you cover the story of my children's death?" And that is
Mm.
one of the hardest ones I've ever done,
Right. Yeah.
because I mean, 6 babies between the ages of,
Mm.
well, I guess they're not all babies, but 12 and 19.
Oh my gosh. How horrific.
And what's worse is that 3 of them shouldn't have even been there, because I could go on for hours about how unfair the child protective services is to certain people in our
Hmm.
culture,
Hmm.
and they let other people get passes, and that's exactly what happened in that case. The
Don't get me
two the
started on
white
CPS, girl.
the listen,
Mhm.
working in childcare and making the amount of reports that I do, it is insanely frustrating, the number of cases that get dropped for lack of evidence because the victims are 3 or 4 years old. And a 3 and 4, they don't have the language to explain what's happened to them, and it's extra traumatic to force a child to now go through this conversation again.
Mhm.
And
That's why
so we just let it go. Oh, it just boils my blood.
there a lot of states have what's called child advocacy centers. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that concept, but it's a co-location of services where it's the police, the district attorney's office, people that can provide, orders, legal advice. They put every agency in one building that a victim would need to speak with, and they only tell their story once, so that
Oh,
they're not
that's nice.
traumatized over and over and over.
That's
And
good.
they have forensic child interviewers, people that do play therapy with some of the younger children you're talking about that may not be
Yeah.
able to verbalize it as well. We finally caught on to that. And guess what? That's after research. Research has contributed to we learning to us learning about these types of issues. And so, yeah, and they have there's a similar concept, pardon me, for the Family Justice Center for victims of domestic violence.
Mm.
They've got everything co-located in one service. District attorney or a prosecutor that can write an order of protection. There's police there. There's social um, workers, and there's a family justice center in a neighboring county here that I was involved in the strategic planning for. It is an amazing place, amazing concept. So I want folks
I
to
hope
go
more of
to it,
those.
right? So yeah, it's been very interesting. I'm hoping that maybe one of these cases is solved in this book. Especially
I mean,
Hollywood.
even if they just open them back up, I mean,
Well,
that's
they're all open.
oh, that's great.
I did confirm they have never been closed. But of course, we're a really small county. Hood County is very small, and we just don't have enough resources. I'm wanting to work with the police department and the sheriff's department. I haven't spoken to the sheriff yet. I used to live behind his daughter. We were next door neighbors and hung out. But I would offer my services to write grants for the police department
Mm.
for free, not even charge them to do it, just give back to my community to help them with whatever, training grants, grants for equipment. A lot of times, small agencies don't, get a lot because the money is sent to the larger, especially in
The big
our area,
cities, yeah.
Dallas, Houston,
Yep. Same
yeah.
thing in my
So,
state. Philadelphia is gonna get all the money.
right. So, I want to do that to help my community too. But um, this has been a very interesting journey for me. I just could not have imagined all the doors that would have opened up, the people that I've talked to, people from Granbury, and it doesn't matter what class they graduated from. Granbury Pirates, class of 1967. I've talked to all people from all ages, from all, you know, our classmates are concerned about Holly's case. It has devastated so many people. They still remember it. There's a lot of people that want this thing solved. And so the police department has worked really hard. They've done a lot of things over the years. They have not let it go. It's one of those cases that sticks with that detective.
Mhm.
They think about it all the time. They think of
The
different ways.
brutality of that.
Yes, yes. We just need our district attorneys in this town to do something about it.
Mhm. Well, I've said this to you off air, but I'm going to say it to you publicly too, Kelly. I think you're an exceptional woman, and
Oh, thank
just
you.
just this is what you're doing is incredible, and I hope that you get the response that you want from your community and from the true crime community in terms of wanting to give justice to these families. And giving voices to families is something that we definitely need to do more of within the true crime community,
We do.
and anybody who does that is great by me.
Well,
uh
thank you.
now I know your Instagram is Kelly, that's Kelli Tomlinson Martin, and you told me you made a TikTok.
I did, and I made a goofy video on there of me singing to a really rock and roll song because I mean, I don't sound like it. I know I probably sound like a country bumpkin on this podcast, but I'm a rock and roller, so I had Dorothy in the background.
Oh,
Put a gun in my hand.
see, more we talk, the more we have little
I
similarities. Same thing with the personality, very bright and bubbly. You and I chatted for like hours the first
did.
time we talked.
I
And then
know.
you feel this connection to wanting to remind people of things that have happened, to shine lights on things, to one of the things I've been focusing on, I think last season, was the throwaway people, as I feel
Yes.
like they call the people of
Right.
our society
The
whose cases aren't
disenfranchised.
getting solved
Hmm. Right.
because maybe
They're
they're
not.
a drug addict, or
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
maybe you live in a bad neighborhood. And so those are
Right.
cases that
Right.
I've been talking more about. This is all stuff that needs to be, a light shown on as often as possible. And so I think it's amazing that you're doing it. Is
Thank
Kelly,
you.
your Facebook page is called Homicide in the Hood, the same name as the book. Is
Right.
there any other way that people can contact you on social media if they want to follow you as you're covering this case and posting about things?
Those are the cases. I mean, I'm sorry. Those are the platforms. The Homicide in the Hood Facebook page, the Instagram Kelly Tomlinson Martin, and the TikTok with that same name.
Kelly
Eh,
Tomlinson Martin.
right. I
No,
put
no, because
Tomlinson in there because my cousin was a sheriff here, and everybody knew who Edwin Tomlinson was. But
so yeah, I'm gonna link all of those
okay,
in the liner notes for the episode.
okay.
I just want to say thank you so much for speaking with us. And
Thank you,
I
Brittany.
can't wait to see the book when it comes out, get a
Thank you so
copy,
much.
post about
Yes.
it myself.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, and thank you to all the listeners. And I just want to say, say a prayer for the victims. We tend to sensationalize the killers all the time, but
Hmm.
in my book, I want to talk about the victims and who they were too. So thank you very much.
All right. And for everybody listening, you have a good weekend.